Hello S2 and welcome to your Titanic assessment revision lesson. What we're aiming to do in this lesson is to recap what you need to know for your Titanic assessment. Now, firstly, what happened on the night of the disaster? Now what you need to think about for this is what you learned in class and what you saw when you were watching the movie. The night of the disaster itself, what actually took place. Now to start you off, you know on the night of the disaster that the Titanic hit the iceberg. Think about what else happened that night. So you know that the compartments start to flood on board the Titanic. You know that first class passengers are given priority to board lifeboats. What else happens the night the Titanic sinks? Now as I said there, I know that you've watched the movie, but be careful between what is fact and what is fiction. So think about the ship itself, what happens to the passengers on board the ship, those who maybe aren't able to get on lifeboats. You also need to think about the survivors and the victims the night the Titanic sinks. So you've got a table here which you also looked at in class. Now what I want you to do is to look at this table and to think about what category of passengers were least likely to die and what category of passengers were most likely to die. And why was this? Why was this the case? Think about what you learned in the first few lessons of Titanic about how certain passengers were treated on board the Titanic, how much tickets cost for the Titanic, and ultimately what was the experience of certain passengers on board the Titanic. Think also for this, which category of passengers were allowed on board the lifeboats first. You also need to think about for your assessment the lifeboats themselves. Now the White Star Line, who funded the Titanic, they knew they should have more lifeboats, but there was a number of reasons why they reduced the amount of lifeboats they had. Now some of these reasons include the fact that they didn't want the decks to look too cluttered on board the Titanic. They didn't want it to spoil the look of the ship overall. Too many lifeboats meant ultimately that first class passengers would have to walk in threes, not fours on the deck, which was an inconvenience for them. It also blocked out the sun if there were too many lifeboats. And remember, the Titanic itself was meant to be unsinkable. So why do you need lifeboats if the ship is meant to be unsinkable? Also, when you're thinking about your assessment, you need to think about the suspects. Now what I mean by suspects here is who was to blame for the Titanic actually sinking. Now, the captain of the Titanic itself, Captain Smith, is one person that historians blame. You also have Thomas Andrews, who was the architect for the ship, and the shipbuilders Harland and Wolff. You have Stanley Lord, who was the captain of the California, and you have the White Star Line company itself and Bruce Ismay, who was the managing director. So think about who was to blame for the Titanic sinking. Now you do a lesson on this as well. Think about the different reasons why these people or these groups are blamed for the Titanic sinking. Also for your assessment, you need to know the difference between primary and secondary sources. Now, a primary source is a source that is produced from the time of the event. Now, these can include things like a speech from somebody who's maybe at the event, a diary entry from the time of the event, a meeting that's been taking place, an artefact from the time of the event is also a primary source, or maybe an interview. Now what I mean by the word artefact, that would be things that would be found on board, say the Titanic for example. So a plate from the Titanic would be an artefact and would be a primary source. A diary entry from someone on board the Titanic would be a primary source. A secondary source is a source that's produced a long time after the event. Now, secondary sources can include books, textbooks, websites, and even movies are all examples of secondary sources written a long time after the event. You also need to know for your assessment how to answer three types of questions in history. Now, the first type of question you need to know how to answer is a describe question. Now, a describe question, which you've done in S1 as well, that's just your simple list of firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly. Now, you've got an example here of describe life on board the Titanic for first class passengers, 2 marks. So you've got here, firstly, they had a private promenade deck to walk on, that would get you a mark. Secondly, they had access to Turkish baths. So this is quite a straightforward question to answer. Now remember, don't just put it all in one sentence, make sure it is separate points. If it's worth 2 marks, you give 2 points. If it's worth 4 marks, you would give 4 points. You also need to know how to answer an explain question. Now, this is worth 2 marks in your assessment. Now, for an explain question, remember we use numeric A, B, C. So answer, because, comment. Now, an example might be explain the reasons why the Titanic sunk. 3 marks. So, your answer, you need to use the wording of the question. So, one reason the Titanic sunk was, then the B stands for because, then comment, give an answer. It hit an iceberg which damaged the ship. Then you would then say another reason the Titanic sunk is because, and you would give another reason there. So you might say, for example, is because Captain Smith ignored the iceberg warnings, would be another reason. You might also say another reason the Titanic sunk is because Captain Lord of the California ignored the Titanic's pleas for help. So answer, because, and comment. You need to use the wording of the question, you need to answer it to get your mark. And then the last type of question that you need to have to answer is a source comparison question. Now, how we answer this question is 3 simple steps. So firstly, you need to say if the sources agree or disagree with each other. So an overall comparison at the start. That is step number 1. Step number 2, you need to find the points from the source that they agree or disagree on. So you say the sources agree or disagree about. Then step number 3, you need to find the quotes to match this. So you then would say source A states and source B agrees or disagrees when it states, and you can then quote again from the source. So we'll go over an example here. Sources B and C are about the town of Kirriemuir. So you've got source B here. Kirriemuir is a town in Angus near Forfar. It has a long and interesting history, and records show strong links between the town and Peter Pan. The town itself is in a rural setting and is very close to many excellent walks. Kirriemuir has lots of local shops. It also has a high school which caters for pupils from Kirriemuir and the surrounding area. Then we have source C. Many people will have heard of Kirriemuir. The creator of Peter Pan was born in the town. It has one high school called Webster's High School. Many people who live in Kirriemuir work in the local area. It is also close to other well-known places including Forfar. There's also a high school in Forfar which has recently moved to a new building. And your question says, compare the views of sources B and C about the town of Kirriemuir. Now, after reading over those sources there, you should see that the sources agree with each other. And this is how your answer would look. So overall, sources B and C agree about the town of Kirriemuir. So that will get your mark at the start. That's your overall comparison. So you've said that the sources agree. You then need to say what the sources agree on and find the quotes that match. So, the sources agree about the town being close to Forfar. There's 1 mark. Then we need to quote from the source. As source B states, Kirriemuir is a town in Angus near Forfar, and source C agrees when it states it is also close to other well-known places including Forfar. So there's another mark for developing your comparison. The sources also agree about the town having strong links to Peter Pan. There's another mark. Then the quotes that match. As source B states, it has a long and interesting history and records show strong links between the town and Peter Pan. And source C agrees when it states the creator of Peter Pan was born in the town. In the last part, the sources also agree about the town having a high school. There's a mark. As source B states, it also has a high school which cares for pupils from Kirriemuir and the surrounding area. And source C agrees when it states it has one high school called Webster's High School. So that's how you answer the source comparison question. Now it's over to you. So for your Titanic revision, what you need to do is to either make a mind map or poster to help you revise for your Titanic assessment. Now once you have completed this, we'd like you to upload a picture via Teams to show your mind map or poster. Now if you choose to do this on Word, then that is fine, you can upload a copy to Microsoft Teams. Now an example might be something like this. So you'd have Titanic revision in the middle of your jotter, and then around that you would have what you need to know for your assessment, and then you'd add in notes. So for example, night of the disaster, and then you'd add in notes around that. So you might say, for example, the Titanic hit an iceberg, the compartments flooded, first class passengers got aboard the lifeboats first. You've also got there who was to blame for the Titanic sinking and why was there so few lifeboats, and primary versus secondary sources. So once you've completed this revision task, if you just upload either a picture or a Word document to Teams. Thank you.